And let me introduce Mike Wasserman and Brian Paris. Mike, let's start with you. Tell us real quick where you are and how long you've been playing poker professionally, and anything else you want to tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I've been playing professionally since, I quit my job in 2008, but I've been playing professionally, I would say, since like 2010. And putting in a ton of volume from like 2010 to 2015, 16, and mostly online. I decided to really go after it live. 2019, I got 1 year of volume in, and then COVID hit. So back to the online streets for me. But it's been a long, hard road. But I'm just glad to still be doing it. And yeah, I'm over here on the West Coast, so it's a little bit earlier. I know for Brian, it's like middle of the night. So thanks for hanging in there, Brian.
Yeah, no worries. I'm used to it.
Yeah, so extra bonus points to Brian for hanging around for this webinar. He's in the Netherlands, and is it 1 a.m. there right now, or midnight?
Yeah, 1 a.m., but this is my peak mental hours anyway, because this is when the poker tournaments are, so it's fine.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Brian, and what you do over there and how long you've been playing professionally.
That's kind of similar story to Mike, but I know I skipped the real job part. I went straight into professional out of university in 2006. So I've been pro for 16 years now. Geez. But yeah, I was mostly online. I was the second player to ever hit $10 million in online cashes, not profits. I always have to specify that it is cashes, but that was a nice milestone for me to hit. I moved to the Netherlands in 2013 for online poker, basically. And I started streaming on Twitch and having a YouTube channel in 2016. So I've been sort of growing the following since then. I was Twitch streaming the whole time that I was chasing that 10 million milestone. So that was kind of my, what got me launched on Twitch. But yeah, just still playing pro, mostly online. I was doing the whole EPT for a while, and then not quite as much recently because we have 2 kids now, so it's harder to travel. So I'm back in the online grind. But yeah, just living over here, playing online. It's pretty nice.
Has the game changed a lot since you said 15, 16 years now?
Oh, yeah.
How much has the game changed since then, since when you first started?
Well, it's changed tremendously. I mean, at the beginning, the poker was so popular and it was so new that just having like an opening hand range chart, basically, or just having some sort of idea of like what opening range you should use and like knowing how to continuation bet and just real basic stuff like that was enough to make you a winner right away. And then, over the years, it's gotten tougher and tougher. Software has come out, more like innovations have been made in the realm of theory. So you have to keep up with it now. You kind of have to study it if you want to play at a high level. But yeah, the game has changed quite a bit, and it's required a lot of evolution to keep up with it.
Would you agree with that, Mike? Maybe it was a little bit easier back when you first started. There were, if you just had a hand chart, that was kind of enough to give you an edge over the rest of the competition, but players are more savvy nowadays.
Absolutely. I mean, I had some scores like in the 2008 to 2010 range where I really didn't know what I was doing very well. So that's a testament to, yeah, if you know a little more than your competition, you should be okay. But the game is constantly getting tougher. So, that was part of the reason why we ended up doing this course, was because I just thought it was so important for people to understand what it takes to survive in this landscape, this like changing tournament landscape, both live and online, and the way poker has evolved over the last like 10 to 15 years, or I guess almost 20 years now, since the boom started. And yeah, it's just constantly changing and requires a lot more to be able to like stay afloat now than it used to. So it's not really a lazy man's like game anymore. It used to just be people that didn't want jobs, played poker, but now it's like you really got to treat it like a job.
Yeah, I can testify to the fact that I only would maybe call myself a semi-professional player for a year or so back 10 years ago, and I was playing, let's say 6 hours a day. I still had a real job at that point, but I was playing maybe 6 hours a day doing 8 tables and that kind of thing. And it was just the amount of, I mean, I didn't realize what a real job it was, and the amount of respect I have for you guys that are able to do this for so long, because I just remember even after playing for 6 hours or something, just being completely fried and just, both mentally and emotionally drained. And that was just kind of as a in the
Yeah.
evenings after work kind of thing. And you guys are doing this 7 days a week and for 10, 15 years now. So I have a tremendous amount of, having done it for even 6 months or a year, I have a tremendous amount of respect for it.
Let me just say, like, as long as I've been doing this, and this is like why I was so excited to work with Brian specifically on this course, because I've played 100,000 tournaments. I've won a whole bunch of majors. I've had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 like deep, like 6-figure downswings. I've been through like the gamut, right? I've just been through it all. Brian's been doing it longer and he's been through more. He has more caches. So I just have a very deep respect for Brian. So it was like an honor to be able to work with him on this project. And I know he can speak to exactly what you're talking about, like the exhaustion. As much as I used to play 5 days a week, there's absolutely no way I could play tournaments 5 days a week now. I literally physically can't do it. I don't know how people do it. And as they get older, I could in my 20s and my 30s, but as you start to get up there, it's if you can put in a solid 3 days of tournaments, 12-hour days, sometimes 14-hour days, that's all you can really handle. What do you think about that, Brian?
Yeah, it's as time goes on, I definitely find myself playing less volume, or else I get burned out. I just wanted to answer some quick questions from the chat. Yes, Netherlands, that's where I've been since 2013. Great country. Highly recommend visiting if you guys haven't checked it out yet. And does this apply to both cash games and tournaments? Yes, both, at least online, both formats have gotten significantly more advanced over the last 20 years. In terms of live play, I mean, if you're playing on like recreational style live games, I don't think those have necessarily advanced to the same degree that we're talking about online. But yes, I think that cash games online, if anything, have become even tougher than tournaments. But anyway, as far as longevity and burnout goes, yeah, I actually found myself having to cut back recently. I was playing a little bit too much as recently as the last 3 months of last year. So I've kind of been trying to move to a model where I study a lot more and play a lot less. It's just, it's quality over quantity kind of.
Is there anything, how do you deal with the stress of tournament poker? Are there any, anything you do? I mean, do you ever find yourself wishing you just had a normal job, or does that not really happen?
Not for me. I love it. I need some sort of sweat going. I mean, I'm not like a gambler. I mean, I enjoy variance, right? But I only enjoy variance when I have an edge. So it sounds like I'm going to sound like I'm some sort of gambling addict, but not really. I like to have, my money on the table. I like to have it fluctuating, but I like to do it when I have an edge. So I don't really crave normalcy so much. And in any event, you can get that if you want to. You can do other things on the side with poker, like what we're doing right here. You can do coaching. You can do, you can make content like on Twitch or YouTube or whatever. So there are ways to get regular income streams through poker. And as I've gotten older and had kids and everything, I've had to branch out into that a little bit more, but I've never really had the desire to leave poker entirely. And I'm really made for it.
Yeah, it hits home, asking that question, do you ever wish you had a normal job? For me personally, I may be the single most risk averse tournament poker professional on the earth. So my disposition is actually not very good for tournament poker. So this process for me over the last almost 15 years has been so painful. But I'm so stubborn and want to succeed at things so much that I fight through it and just do it anyway. So how do I deal with the stress? I run quite a bit. Just exercising and relaxing and taking days off was something that I was really hard for me to do. Literally, I felt like if I took a day off and I didn't study or didn't do something productive, that it was not a productive, that it was a waste of a day. And this is something I worked with Jared Tendler on, who does mental game coaching. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I could just take a day off and just watch shows or sleep or just do whatever. And it doesn't have to be productive. And that creates productivity like in the next day or the day after that, because you're rested and you perform better the next day, or for the rest of the week. So yeah. But my motivation personally for poker is not necessarily focusing on what I want, but more on what I don't want, which is probably not healthy. But I don't ever want to go back to a normal job. I'll never do that unless I very consciously choose I want to work and I don't care about what the hourly or the pay is. I'm doing it because I enjoy it. I'll never go do Cheesecake Factory was it for me. Once I gave my 1 month notice, like that was it. And then I final tabled the tournament for 25K, like, which was 10xing my net worth the week after I quit, like left the job. Nice. And I was like, this is a sign, you know. Horrible bankroll management. I just bought in for $500 with 3K to my name and somehow found myself at the final table and we chopped.
Sweet.
Yeah. So, but I'll never go back. So that's, yeah, I don't know. I think that answers the question.
Yeah.
Probably.
So yeah, I'd be
That's
curious what you would say, you know, why so many people fail when they try to turn pro. Is it because of the lack of ability to balance personal life with their poker life, or is it bankroll management? You know, which you mentioned several stumbling blocks. Why have you guys? I could ask this question to either of you. You know, why have you succeeded when so many people want to play poker professionally, but so many try and fail?
Well, it's a tremendously difficult, like meritocratic enterprise, you know, and it requires a lot of moving parts and a lot of balance. To kind of like what Mike was saying about how this is something that happens whenever you work for yourself in any capacity, but you're always at this idea that like, oh, all my time has to be productive. Like I could be playing right now and making this hourly. I could be studying and improving my game, you know, so you have to have this like it
becomes unhealthy.
You need a sense of like personal time management. You need to be able to like balance out your hours and stuff. So I think that's a big thing. You have to have discipline, and then you also have to have the discipline to like manage your bankroll correctly. You have to have the discipline to study enough. You also have to have the predisposition towards, you know, math and numbers, and it's not something that all people naturally take to. So, and then there's also a survivorship bias, I think, for all of us who have made it as a pro. Like you were saying, you know, if you don't hit that 25K score the week after you quit your job or whatever, then it's obviously going to be tougher for you. You might still make it anyway, but that having something like that, you know, a lot of pros have a big score like that kind of early in their career. I think that sort of catapulted them into the lifestyle. And yeah, it's a tremendously difficult thing. You know, both of us have seen a lot of people who were regs 10, 15, 20 years ago, and you know, every year, some of them leave the tables, you don't see them anymore. So there's definitely a pretty high attrition rate for like long-term pros. It's not an easy thing to do, but if you do have the right balance, the right disposition, and the right you know, approach, it can be a very rewarding way to make a living.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're like the people that haven't made it as long as we've made it and you know, had that longevity. Some of them have had massive scores. Like, again, my biggest score is like, I had like 150K day. I've had, you know, I know it sounds like a lot for a day, right? But like I'm playing constantly. I'm putting out, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in buying. It's like 150K is really not that big for the amount that I'm buying in for. I've had, you know, a couple scores around the 100K mark, but like nothing too crazy. And Brian's actually the same. And he, you know, so neither of us have had like that $1 million score or that 500K score for like the amount of times that him and I have put ourselves in a tournament where we could win 500K, and we just haven't done it. And that's okay. You can still make a living if you're doing a lot of small things right. And that's how we've survived. But I can't even tell you how many people I've seen that have $1 million scores, sometimes multi-million-dollar scores, and they go broke. Sometimes it doesn't even take them that long to go broke. It's really sad, and yeah, it like I've seen it so many times, and it's so hard to watch because I'm like really diligent about money management. That's probably like one of my strongest things. Um, and to just watch people piss away like a score that I've never had. Like if I had $1 million score, that would be a really big deal for me. I would know exactly what to do with the money. A lot of these like people that win, like a lot of they're like kids, right? And they don't know what to do with the money, and they just kind of make bad choices, get wrapped up in table games or whatever it is, and
Yeah,
they
it's
blow it.
amazing how fast, sounds like a lot of money, amazing how fast you can blow through $1 million by making bad decisions and hanging around card rooms and casinos with blackjack tables. And yeah, so and you're right, it is sad to see that. But I think that's also, the fact what you mentioned, that neither you nor Brian has had a huge score like that, and you're still here 10, 15 years later. That is a tribute to the fact that you're doing something right. You haven't, variance hasn't been your friend, in the sense that you haven't made these $1 million scores. So obviously the fundamentals you have got to be correct for you still to be here all these years later doing this. So maybe with that, if you have anything else to add to that, I was going to say maybe we should jump into the presentation you were going to make for us tonight.
Yeah, sure. We can get started on that.
Yeah. Okay, so I need to share screen. You need to enable screen share.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah.
Someone asked about hourly for tournament players, and I was saying in the chat, it varies too much to be a useful metric. But at the end of each year, you can sort of estimate how many hours you played and your profit, and kind of get a rough idea for it that way. But yeah, that's one of the things about this job is it's some of the hours you're playing will be tremendously high value, and a lot of the hours you're playing are just kind of like garbage time. Like if you imagine someone playing in like a sports game or whatever. So it's often more important to be sharp for your highest value hours than it is to put in the raw largest number of hours.
Yeah, I'd like to add like a quick thing to that. I don't play on Saturdays, but I play religiously on Sundays. And I actually start preparing for Sunday on Saturday, right? Like I'm mostly a vegetarian, but I do eat some fish. So I guess I'm a pescatarian, but I eat some fish like the night before. So I have like sustainable energy for the next day. And I make sure I go to bed at a decent time. And so my Sunday starts on Saturday. And if I'm not playing a lot of days in the week, I treat the day before similarly, even though the EV is different for a Sunday than it is for like a Thursday. But I think it's important to, like Brian said, have the discipline to treat it like a business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sunday's our big day. We're like NFL players in that regard anyway.
Yeah. And it's funny that the comparison there makes a lot of sense too. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are certain NFL players who have longevity because they take really good care of their health off the field. Tom Brady's still was 44 years old, I think. Still
incredible.
As a QB, he may come back again. And then there's some other players who, their lifestyle choices off the field cut their career short really quickly. So you should be able to screen share now. One thing I wanted to say real quick before you start that is
I totally forgot. I was just enjoying the talk.
Anyone, if you have questions during the presentation, Mike and Brian may choose to answer them during the presentation, or they may, if it's something more complicated, they may leave it for the Q&A section at the end. There is a
can you see this?
Yeah, we got it. See your screen now. You can post your questions to the chat window if you like, or there's also a Q&A window. This is my first time doing this webinar on Zoom. We haven't used the Zoom webinar platform before, but there appears to be a Q&A window as well. And if you post your question to the Q&A chat, then it'll be even easier for Mike and Brian to find your questions in there. But either way should be okay, because we'll be monitoring the regular chat window as well. Yep, it looks like Eric already found the Q&A window. So it looks like everyone should have access to that. So, all right, whenever you're ready, take it away, guys.
Sure, give me one sec. Trying to get everything lined up on my monitors properly.
And just to
Um,
remind everyone, again, we're talking, I believe you're going to be sharing the three biggest, most common mistakes you see tournament players make. Is that correct?
yeah, generally recreational players or people, I mean, when I play live, this is like these are like the most common mistakes that I see live, but it also happens obviously at all stakes of online tournaments. Um, but I think it's useful for people that even play like, you know, these live tournaments, like local casino tournaments.
Okay, great.
And yeah, Brian and I agree on these, and we'll try not to get too deep into the weeds, but we want to make sure that you have some like some strategies that you can take with you and apply, you know, and use, not just random stuff to listen to here. So, all right. So the first hand we have here, it's not really about necessarily the result, but it's more about just the spot and the concepts that are attached to it. So the first one is not playing aggressive enough. And so we split this into a couple sections. The first is, Brian, you want to talk about this one, about general tournament strategy of early stages versus late stages?
Yeah. So one of the most common mistakes that we see for recreational players, especially in tournaments, is that people will play too loose early and they'll play too tight late. So, you know, a lot of the time in, you know, level 1, 2, and 3 of a tournament, you'll see a lot of, you know, 5-way pots and people splashing around and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But then, you know, once you get near the money bubble, you suddenly start seeing people play really tight and they'll get short stacks and they'll play too tight. So I think one of the most common mistakes that we see is people playing too loose early and too tight late. So it's a very easy adjustment to make, but it helps. It would help if you got used to if you can get used to the idea of having shorter stacks and sort of the adjustments that you need to make for that, playing more aggressively, being willing to go all in when the situation calls for it, which it very often will when you're playing shorter stacks. So that's one of the first things we're going to cover here.
Yeah, and more to his point, I have based my general tournament strategy around that, specifically what he just said, that the field plays too loose early and too tight late. So my adjustment is I do the opposite. I play tight and solid early, and then in the end of the tournament, I like to say I become a savage. So I'm just like on the prowl for like all different spots. But I like having the table image to be able to get away with these things. And it's also very player dependent, right? Like you have to, that's always something with poker in general, is picking your spots. And what that means is, you know, is this the right guy to do it against, to bluff against, or is this the guy that's going to call a huge value bet or a small value bet? So you need to adjust on the fly. But the general idea is loosen up more and be willing to gamble more at the end of the tournament because other people aren't. And then in the early stages, just take it easy because it doesn't make that much of a difference anyway.
Yeah, and one of the most common mistakes for these later stages is just learning how to, or especially for these like lower stakes live recreational tournaments, is learning how the push fold ranges work. So that's what we're going to analyze in this hand, is just how wide you need to be willing to go all in spots like this, how wide you need to be willing to call. So let's go ahead and take a look at the range here for
so
how much we're supposed to be moving all in with this hand when it folds to us.
Yeah, so the
Or this
context
spot,
of
rather.
the context of this spot specifically was, this is a $50 tournament with like a huge field, right? So it's going to be a similar field that you guys are going to be playing against. And yeah, so I'll just hit ICMIs. So I've already input the prize pool, the payouts, how many players are in the tournament, all that stuff. So it's going to give us a pretty accurate read. Okay, so the first thing that we see here is our stack is worth, this is, the big blind's 250,000. So obviously this is very deep in the tournament. But it says our stack is worth approximately 10K. I think that's off by a bit, but the first thing we have to do in here is go to how did I want to do this? Oh my God, I just totally blanking. So basically what we're looking at is like what people are calling with. I'm not going to adjust all the ranges right here, but you can see that in this spot, the King 7 is negative $300. And I could adjust the ranges a bit, and I would guess that this is like really close in one direction or the other to break even. And the reason that I go into detailed results is because it shows what my stack is worth, which is, let's just say that it is worth 10K, you know, give or take $1,000. Taking a spot that's plus or minus $300 is not, it's not hugely consequential long term. $300 is a lot. I think it's like I said, closer to break even here, but I knew that in game, I need to maintain fold equity. So I decided that I'm going to take this spot and shove when I have fold equity against the big blind, and I'm shoving into stacks that are going to have a hard time calling with any marginal hands. So I specifically chose to take a marginal spot here. And I think that it's really easy to pass on these spots. And when you're short stacked, I only have 7.5 blinds. Once you pass on like 1, 2 of these spots, blinds go up and you literally have no fold equity anymore. You can't shove and get it through. It's going to get called 100% of the time. So I chose to gamble here and try to maintain my stack just a little bit. So what do you think of that, Brian?
I think the more, let's see. Yeah, so I agree with some of what you're saying. I think the biggest takeaway here is just how much we have to shove in this spot in general. So it's what, 28% of our hands when it folds to us here?
Yeah.
And so
this is what our range looks like.
Yeah, some of the hands that are coming up here, even if King 7's not quite in the range, like 8-7 suited, King 7 suited, Queen 8 suited. Like, I'm not sure if all of you guys are taking these types of hands in live tournaments and going all in with them for 7.5 big blinds, but this is a nice example of just how wide you need to be in spots like this. Even if you don't want to go as wide as King 7, it's good to know the hands that are making you money. And then if you go back to the other screen we had, it shows you how much money each hand is making. So you have an idea of just how much money you are making by moving all in with these hands. You can kind of compare them to each other. Like Ace 4 offsuit is barely making anything. It's making $3. 8-7 suited is making $2. So it's not so important if you miss those shoves. But if you're missing like Queen 9 suited or something like this, then you could be leaving quite a bit of money on the table. So what I find is sort of a nice level up for people who are sort of recreational, is just thinking of this in terms of percentages. Like, okay, so I want to shove here about 28% of the time. And then when it folds around to the big blind, let's look at the big blind's calling range against our shove, because someone in the chat said the big blind will call less than 24%, which I think is probably accurate, especially in a live tournament. So like in a live tournament, let's say you're playing a live tournament, do you think your opponent's going to call in here with like Ace 5 offsuit, Ace 4 offsuit, Queen 10 suited? I mean, they're supposed to in terms of math, but in some of these softer live tournaments, especially when you're getting deeper in the tournament, nearing a bubble, I don't think that people are going to find all of these hands to call with. So
there's no way.
The fewer of these hands that your opponents call with, the more you can get away with shoving hands like the King 7 here. So even if you don't want to actually expand your range too much, it's good to know what the range should be. And if you judge that your opponents are tighter, then you can expand it, as we'll demonstrate here.
Well, I didn't really want to get too much into adjusting the ranges, because really we need to adjust all of their ranges. But just adjusting the big blinds range, we're making $50 more. So if we tighten these ranges up just a tad, it's going to be closer to break even. But the point is not necessarily what the EV of the King 7 off is here, because I specifically was like, I'm just going to take this spot and gamble because I need to pick up chips. I knew it was just outside what I should be shoving. Generally, you want to have suited hands in these spots. If you are going to take it, to have like, even to have King Deuce suited instead of King 7 off is better. But I mean, are you guys shoving King Deuce suited or King 6 suited or any of these hands? It's just a question to ask yourself and be aware of, because it's really, really important to maintain fold equity when all the stack sizes are short. So, all right, you want to move on to now, there's one more part I wanted to show, or one more concept about not playing aggressive enough. Hand 135. Give me a second here.
While you're looking that up, I'll just add, I think I love the way you put it, Brian, that people play, like you said, too loose early and too tight late. And they should be doing the opposite of that. I just never heard it put that succinctly. I really like that as a great takeaway here of point number one.
Yeah, we played so many World Series of poker tournaments back in the day, and I saw this over and over and over again. Every hand in level one would be, 5 ways to the flop. People would be like 5x opening, and then by the time you get close to the money, people are like folding, ace nine face up in the big blind against an all in or something, and it's just just a complete inversion of the way things should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't need to go too much into ranges here, but I just want to show this as an example, and then we'll move on to number 2, the next concept. This was at the final table of this tournament, and it was a really aggressive chip leader to my left. And I mean, you can look at all the stack sizes, but it's more about my hand and my stack size against his this player type. So I decided to limp in here with the ace 8 suited, knowing that he would put pressure on me and raise pre-flop. I didn't think that he would shove. If he shoves, this is a really horrible spot, but to be in, but I really didn't think that would happen very often off of 24, 25 big blinds. I thought he would 3x or 3.5x at a pretty high frequency, and this would be a really great spot for me to limp shove over his raise, because he's going to be raising too many hands from the big blind. And actually, if you're him in the big blind, being aggressive in this spot against a limp is a really good idea. I just happen to have a hand and the willingness to exploit this. So he does actually make it 3x, and this is a really high equity spot. So you really don't see amateurs taking these types of spots very often, or even professionals that are just like afraid to pull the trigger in high equity spots. And then I decided to jam on him and he folded. But I was so confident in this spot. It was like a high five moment, but it's because I had a very strong read on the big blind and his tendencies. So I just kind of wanted to show this just to kind of expand your thinking about these types of spots and about, what you can, what's possible, I guess.
There's a couple interesting concepts going on here. One is that it's sort of similar to when you check when you're the out of position player and let your opponent c-bet. Like here, we expect him to raise our limp very often. So rather than raise ourselves, we will just take the default passive option and then let him take the first action. If we were to raise ourselves, we'd make it 3 big blinds, 4 big blinds, then he would call, and then we'd see a flop, which is okay. We're probably ahead of his hand, but then we're playing a pot out of position. We're at a final table. We want to make ladders. We don't want to play these pots out of position. We'd rather take a decisive move, end the hand immediately. So it's a nice example of how sometimes when you expect your opponent to take a certain action, you want to set him up to take that action, and then you can take your reaction. Another thing that's nice to think about this spot is going back to what I was saying about percentages. This hand, I mean, ace 8 suited, it's a top 10% hand. It's a really damn good hand. And you're blind versus blind. There's 2 players in the pot. So at the end of the day, you have a top 10% hand. It might not seem like it's worth going all in for your whole tournament at a final table, but it is actually quite good. So thinking of things in terms of percentiles can sort of help you in these spots, especially when it's like late position versus late position.
Yeah. We won't go into like calling ranges or anything, but I just wanted to show it as an example.
Quick question from Peter here. If he had shoved, what would we have done given our knowledge of the player? In this spot, it's not so much about your knowledge of the player. It's more about the presence of all the short stacks. Even if he goes all in, we expect to be ahead of his range, because he's probably not going to just go all in with a hand that actually beats us. The hand that actually beats us is probably going to do a small raise like this to try to induce a jam from us. So if he were to go all in against us, I would expect us to be well ahead of him. The problem, of course, is that there's a 5 big blind stack, a 10 big blind stack, and a 15 big blind stack. So if we were to limp and then call it all in, and then we bust before those 3 players, we're missing out on 3 pretty easy pay jumps that we could make by just waiting. So if he were to move all in, the relevant factor would not so much be our read of him as the presence of the short stacks at the table.
Yeah, that is kind of the risk you take in this spot. Is he does jam some hands. Like if he has 2s through 5s or something, he might shove, and I can't really call. Or if he even has a hand like ace 2 suited and he decides to shove, it's really hard for me to call here. So a good exploit for him is against my limp is to just jam a bunch of hands, but he's risking almost half of his stack. It's a really big jam. So it's more likely, because of these stack sizes, that he's going to do something like 3x or 3.5x. And I would be really, I'm highly aware of the stack sizes, and if this was a good time to do this. If I had 18 big blinds, I probably wouldn't have taken this line. but I had 24. So I had just enough chips to really pull it off and have plenty of fold equity and pick up uncontested chips at the final table with no showdown at a very high frequency. And that's where the value of this play is. It's not something I do very often, but you have to be able to make these adjustments on the fly because these final table spots are ever changing. There's infinite different scenarios that you're going to run into. You just have to figure out how to navigate them. And, like attending webinars like this and seeing that this is a possibility may open your eyes to some different things that you can do. Okay, so the next concept here is underestimating the value of being the original raiser. So let me go to hand 334. 1 second. Okay, so this is basically there's back-to-back hands where it doesn't matter which one we discuss first, but I see really often that when players get short stacked in live tournaments, also sometimes in online tournaments, they'll like in a spot like this where they have ace-8 suited and they only have 8.5, 9.5 blinds or something. They will go with their hand pre-flop because they're short stacked and they feel that they just have to go with any ace. Like I've just seen this so many times. I had to go with any ace. Like, what do you want me to do? That was the justification for it, but there's not enough thought that's going into that. And so, yeah, Brian, do you want to elaborate on spots like this a little bit?
Yeah. So it's a common fallacy, I guess, is someone will take a bad shove in a World Series of poker event. This is where a lot of my reference points for this is playing like these 1K, $1,500 World Series events because they get really big fields with a lot of recreational players. And someone will say, "Oh, I had to go all in. It's the best hand I'd seen in like 4 orbits, and the blinds are going to hit me, and blah 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 blah." But I think it's better to view each hand in sort of, I mean, you want to consider your future stack playability to some degree, but I think it's better to view each hand in sort of a vacuum. Is this hand profitable? If not, I'm going to fold it. And in this particular case, we have an opponent who is under the gun 1, who is 3x'd and is never folding when we go all in. So we're basically faced with a straight value proposition here. There's about 200K dead in the middle with the blinds, not even, like 125K dead in the middle with the blinds. And so we're basically going to be risking 414 to win like 900 something. We need almost 40% equity against this guy's range to get it in here. It may not seem like we do, but we actually do. We need a reasonable amount of equity here. And I think in this case, we just don't have it. So we're better off just waiting. It might seem like 8 big blinds is kind of miserable and it's not ideal, but every hand that you're dealt is an opportunity to potentially be put into a plus EV spot. And it doesn't make sense to take a minus EV spot.
Yeah, especially when you're 100% of the time, you have no fold equity, right?
Yeah, in
And
this case, you have no fold equity.
Yeah, that's like a concept that I think is like overlooked by a lot of recreational players is when you're going to run the equity of your hand against your opponent's hand, like they're never folding to you. That's a completely different spot than my king 7 where I shoved and nobody has called me yet. And they can definitely all fold, right? That's right. Now, if someone opened in front of me and I jammed the king 7 for 7 bigs, that's a huge, horrible mistake. But if I'm the original raiser, so it kind of makes this point even stronger, then I have a chance to get that shove through and pick up the uncontested chips. Here, we have to run it. And over the long term in a tournament career, if you keep running those equities out, it just increases your variance. So we're really looking for spots. If we could in a tournament, we would just always find spots where we never have to run our equities, but we can't because the blinds go up. So eventually, your ace king and queens got to get it in, or my king 7 and queens have to get it in. I don't know. But yeah, you do have to gamble, but you need to be aware of fold equity and understanding that there is somebody in front of you and they have a range of hands. And your hand might not be doing that well against their range. Okay, so we're going to go into the last point here of playing small pairs incorrectly. This is a fun one, and this is one I've seen from the beginning of time since I've been playing. So let me pull up a hand here.
Yeah, on a general principle, a lot of people who play live cash games fall in love with the notion of set mining, which is it's a very easy way to try and hit a big hand in a multi-way pot in a live cash game. But in tournaments, the factors are frequently not there for you to be able to just set mine. Often you're risking too much of your stack. You're going to be calling from an awkward position. So I think that that's one big hurdle that a lot of people have to get over when they're first making the switch, especially from live cash games. But we can go into it a little bit more in some of these spots.
Yeah, actually, let's do this one first. So this is a spot where I have 13 big blinds in the small blind, and deuces. And I mean, Brian, what would you do in this spot?
I think it's shove. It's either a shove or a fold. I don't think calling is a particularly viable option because you're just risking too much of your stack. I'm probably just folding.
Okay, so I chose to fold here too, but I value your opinion in all of these spots. How many big blinds would you need to justify like mathematically calling here with deuces? Like deuces like twos, threes, fours, these hands, you can't really go with like a lot of board textures, right? If you do decide to flat a hand like sixes, sevens, eights, there's certain straight draws that you can flop where you have so much equity, even if they have pocket aces, you can like justify going with your hand. But in a situation like this with deuces, you really would be set mining. And I see this all the time where people will call here because they only have to put, 1.5 bigs in, or a little over 1.5 bigs, and they're not risking their full stack. Not to mention the big blind can shove, and now you just have to fold your twos. But how many big blinds would you want to have in this spot to be able to flat?
I think 30.
Okay. And
I think at 20, you can jam because he's folding a decent amount. But when you only have 13, jamming becomes a little dicier. Like you were saying earlier, there's not much fold equity now. Yeah. And a lot of your equity when you shove here is from him just folding hands that are flipping against you. So shoving for 13 is actually a little bit less attractive than shoving for 20, I think.
Just for fun, I'm just going to hit ICMIs because this program is pretty cool.
But yeah, that's in tournaments, low pairs are much more often played like very aggressively, or else you just fold them. You don't really play them for the set line value. It's more just it's more just a matter of like having some fold equity when you move all in and make him fold.
Yeah. Okay, it's thinking too hard. I don't want to break.
It also depends on the opponent too. If it's somebody who's raising all sorts of nonsense, you can go all in. I think the important takeaway here is that calling is going to underperform quite a bit.
And you would want to have 30 bigs to flat here.
I think at 30 we start flatting.
Yeah, at 20 you would consider just shoving, right? Because you have plenty of fold equity, and you can actually get better hands to fold. Like he can fold out
right
threes, fours, fives, whatever. Or even hands like that are tons of hands that are flipping with you. I mean, every non-paired hand basically is flipping.
Yeah, you don't want to shove an amount that he's obligated to call with like king 10 or something, because then he's just flipping, right? You want to have enough to make him fold that hand. Ideally.
So if you were on the button, how many bigs would you need to flat with this hand?
Probably about 30 again, I would think.
Okay.
And so, even when you're flatting 30, it's not really a set mine so much as it is just like trying to reach showdown with position. It's kind of like people have this notion like, oh, if I don't hit a set, I'm just automatically folding. Now, if you flat deuces on the button with 30 bigs, I believe you are obligated to call bets on some boards where you don't have a deuce. So if you're not comfortable doing that, then you might be better off just folding the first time around.
Yeah, he's touching on another concept here.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't apologize. It just naturally comes out. And all this stuff, just in general, in tournaments, don't try anything new or anything fancy at the end of your tournaments. You guys, like for new information and stuff, apply it in the early stages. Try to familiarize yourself with the concepts and why you want to be doing something a certain way. Don't apply new concepts in final table or high equity situations.
You're better off making a few tight folds than you are, going way out on a limb and doing something crazy. At least if you're not used to doing the crazy stuff anyway.
Exactly. Stick to things that you're familiar with and spots.
Plenty of money to be made in fundamentals in these live tournaments anyway.
Okay. And then the other spot was
sevens.
Yeah, this is the last one that we're going to be going over here. Okay, so this is 8-handed, 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, so I mean, this could be 8 or 9-handed. This is actually at a final table, but it's more about the visual representation of the spot. I see really often that when people have like 2s through whatever 6s, that they're V-pipping. They're voluntarily putting money into the pot at a pretty high frequency in these like live tournaments and low and mid stakes tournaments. Inexperienced players are putting in money with these hands, and they really don't perform well, especially under the gun. So 7s in this particular spot would be a pretty tight fold, but 2s through 6s would be pretty standard fold. What do you think of this concept, Brian?
Yeah, especially at a final table. So at a final table like this, when everyone's kind of short, a lot of the time the hand will be resolved with an all-in pre-flop. Like you're going to raise here, and then one of these shorter stacks will move all in against you. And having something like an ace or a king in your hand that makes it less likely that someone else will be dealt a good hand can actually be better than having a low pair, even if the low pair is technically a better hand. You're not necessarily going to showdown so much. In a lot of these spots, it's just someone's going to move all in. So the types of hands that you optimize for are a little bit different. And these low pairs, they just underperform from early position. You're going to be out of position with them. You're mostly not going to flop a set. So you're going to wind up out of position often with a hand that's really, really difficult to know where you're at and to reach showdown with. So yeah, playing the low pairs from earlier position and the lowest pairs especially, it's much better to just fold those, I think.
Okay, but what if they want to limp in instead of raise? Is that a viable option here? Should we be limping any hands here?
In this particular spot, I would not. At a final table especially. I think the problem with limping, there are pros out there who have actually developed an entire limping strategy, and they have it be coherent, and they have coherent ranges for limping and raising. The problem is that's kind of twice as much work. Most people just play raising ranges because if you throw in a limping range, and you're kind of splitting everything into two camps, and it can really telegraph a lot of information about your hand if someone's paying attention. Whereas if you're raising, even if you have some weak hands in your raising range, you have some strong hands in your raising range, they're all just raises. So your opponent won't be able to tell, that you're limping with all your weak hands and raising with your strong hands to give a very obvious pitfall that a recreational player might fall into. So I personally don't have a limping range in most spots. It'll come up sometimes, like blind versus blind is a spot where you'll limp a lot. Occasionally you'll open limp the button. That's a little bit more of an advanced thing that doesn't come up so much, but it does come up a little bit. But yeah, for most positions, I just play a raise or fold range. And I think that raising strategies tend to outperform limping strategies unless you've just done a ton of work on figuring out all the implications. And for most people to stick with raising.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so I think that's it. We can open the field up to questions.
Only position you ever limp is small blind. Yes, that's for the most part.
For the most part, yeah.
The way it should go, yeah.
There are exceptions. I limp the button at a very low frequency in very specific situations. It's really based on the players that I have to my left and the stack sizes. I will also occasionally limp a hand under the gun, but if my table is playing really, really crazy, I will make some adjustments and limp some hands. But my general strategy, like Brian said, very similar, just open raise.
Do you ever limp with big pairs to induce? Well, that's sort of the thing is like, you can, but the problem is if you're splitting your hands in different categories, like if you're limping all your big pairs, then you're not raising your big pairs, right? And that's the sort of thing that, maybe your opponents won't pick up on it because they're not going to play so many hands with you, but it helps to have just sort of a coherent strategy in your head for how you're going to like structure your opening range. And so yeah, I think that splitting your range into limps and raises just causes more problems than it's going to solve. If you just raise with a reasonably blended range of hands, and when you raise, it's not going to arouse any suspicion. So it's better to raise your big pairs, I think.
I was going to say, before we go too deep into I know we got some questions, more and more people are starting to ask questions here. Mike, if you'd like to pull up the slide and we can tell everyone about the special offer. I told everyone that you all have been kind enough to make an amazing offer for us on your new course, and I've been putting in the chat window here. Everyone can see the link to where they can get this. So tell us a little bit about this course you've got, Mid Stakes Mastery.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. This is like a privilege to be able to make something like this, especially to be able to work with Brian, who's like, we both have, these are like battle tested strategies. We're both battle hardened individuals that have like survived beating after beating in tournaments, and are still here. And that's a testament to our work ethic. It's a testament to a lot of things. But being able to survive this long in any industry, especially tournaments, speaks to being able to adjust and keep learning and keep getting better. And yeah, I just want to say that like it's cool to be able to even offer something like this. So what this course has for you guys is we're doing a special, which is just about 50% off. It's $3 off, sorry, 300 off the 597 list price, so 297 for a couple of days here with Steve. And yeah, it's the first thing that we have in there is an interview. So I kind of talk with Brian about longevity in the game and studying. It's 45 minutes. I guess you could consider it a podcast, and just kind of him and I discussing how we're still here, why we're still here, what got us here, and in case anybody's wondering, like how does somebody grind tournaments and do it for a living? Like we basically just explain it, and the strategies and the like the lifestyle choices that we've made that have gotten us here after between the two of us almost 3 decades of playing tournaments for a living. The second section is the 50 stack review, which is a tournament that Brian won. You want to talk about that, Brian?
Yeah, so the 50 stack, it was a big field tournament on a Sunday. And so it's a type of tournament that's full of a lot of like decent but not amazing players. So it was a really good opportunity for us to sort of demonstrate how to win a big field tournament, because I know a lot of the lower stakes recreational buy-in tournaments can kind of be pretty big fields. Obviously, there's like the nightly tournaments at your local casino, but then there's also like the WSOP circuit event that comes into town or whatever. So it's nice to know how to approach these tournaments where it's a big field full of decent but not amazing players. So the 50 stack was a great example of that. And we go through every hand from the start to the finish, all the way to the final table to the win. So it's a nice way to see like how the strategy evolves throughout the different stages of the tournament. And honestly, what I find the most useful is if you're hearing someone who's more studied in poker, just hearing the way somebody thinks, hearing the way somebody approaches hands, like, oh, what's my range here? How do I do with this parts of my range? To just knowing how to sort of systematically approach hands and ask the right questions, I think is very important. So listening to these should hopefully help some of you guys get there.
Yeah, and we don't go.
I was just going to say, Mike, but you don't mind me chiming in real quick. Because I have your course, and that 50 stack review is really my favorite part of it, because you're reviewing a $55 buy-in tournament here. So this isn't the nosebleed stakes. It's something that everyone can relate to, a $55 buy-in tournament. So I like the fact that what you review in here is something. You guys are blue collar poker pros, if you don't mind that term. And, I think that makes the course so much more useful, because it's really hard for most people to relate. If you were just to review, something you played at the nosebleed stakes, I don't know if the concepts would be useful to most people, but I found that part the most useful of all, is the hand reviews here on the 50 stack.
Yeah, we had already agreed to work on this course, and then Brian won this. So I was like, okay, well, we definitely have to review that hand history. So one of the things that we don't do is we don't go deep into solvers and like deep into range. Like, honestly, I do some of that studying too, but it makes my brain hurt, and there's only so much that I can even take in. What we do though is just focus on how to think about these spots, how to approach these fields, how to approach tournaments in general, and the general strategy and general fundamentals that are going to keep putting you in position to go deep into tournaments. And I feel like that's one of my strong suits. Is once I'm deep in the tournament, I I understand how the dynamics shift, so I can shift with it. Brian obviously is a professional. He does the same thing. We're all capable of all different types of styles and adjusting to our opponents. So I think it's a very fundamentals driven course that there's an overarching theme of why are we still here? How are Brian and I still doing this? We still don't have to get jobs, you know? And the answer is fundamentals. And that's what we focus on. And that's the answer to longevity is focusing
Yeah,
on
and
fundamentals.
I completely agree with you. Again, like I said, I have the course and there's so much useful information in here. Like even in the first 15 minutes, you spend a lot of time talking about this one spot where it's folded to you on the button and you have like 20 bigs, and you talk about the large amount of limping you're doing from that spot.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, I think for a lot of people watching that, that's kind of like a huge, like, what moment? Because you're like, you know, when you see someone limp with like 20 bigs first in from the button, you're like, what an idiot. But here you guys are with, you know, you've got $15 million in cashes, Brian. And the best part is you don't even really expect us to accept the fact that you should be limping there on faith. You bring up the limping chart that you got from the solver. You talk about the problem of open raising too wide there, how observant players in the blinds are going to start murdering you by like jamming on you. And you're going to be like raise folding off 10, 15% of your stack over and over again. So something like that one part right there, if someone actually implements that into their strategy, I feel like that alone could be worth the entire price of the course. And that's just in the first 15 minutes of the course right there. And you've got 20 hours of this.
We get into
that's one of the things about poker studying is a small adjustment over the course of a long period of time can really pay off. And yeah, even just like a little tidbit like that, something you never thought was even possible, can be very beneficial. So appreciate the kind words there, and you were definitely paying attention. I like it.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Well, that was all Brian too. It's his hand history. I'm just along for the ride. But the next section is most common mistakes, which is just like a 30-minute video of the most common mistakes that Brian and I see in low and mid stakes tournaments, what tournament players make, mistakes that tournament players make, and some adjustments that can help you fix those mistakes in case you are making any of them. And even if you're not, you can then it'll be in your head and you can recognize it in other players and you can see when they're making those mistakes. So that's, again, another benefit of studying just in general, is just kind of having these things rattling around in your head. The next section we go into is a full review of a progressive super knockout win that Brian had on pokerstars.fr, Brian, or one of the
one of the French or Spanish PokerStars site. Yeah, it's a smaller site, but it's softer fields. So it was like a 100-person tournament, and it was a knockout tournament. So I don't know how relevant that's going to be for live tournaments, but they are becoming more prevalent online, even for the American sites. And I think more and more live venues are looking into adding them. So it's nice to have a little bit of material on how to approach a knockout in case you have an event like that coming up.
Yeah. And, you know, for the first, like I was telling Steve, like for the first half of that hand history, probably, or at least the first third of it, you can kind of treat it just like a regular knockout. So any knockout that you might play, you can use the first third as general strategy and how to approach knockout tournaments. But as you get deeper into that, it really becomes a progressive super knockout, right? Like the bounties add up. And that's a little bit more of a complex strategy where there's 2 different prize pools. And we get it deep into that also, if that's something you're interested in. But I think there's still a lot of tournament fundamentals that don't just apply to knockouts that you can get from that hand history as well. So it will help reinforce that stuff if you want to watch, if you want to go through that hand history as well. Yeah, and for anyone that's playing online, you guys are definitely going to see these in the lobby, and you'll have an idea how to play them once you go through this.
Yeah, and if you're playing live also, I mean, pretty much every tournament series that comes to town now has at least a couple bounty events in it. So this is going to apply to that too, correct?
Yeah, it's a nice format for driving actions, and I expect more and more live venues will be adopting it. So yeah, knowing just hearing how we make the adjustments and like what sort of basic adjustments to make, how to value the bounty, what strategic modifications you need to make, you'll get all of that information from that part of the course. So that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the next section is the key points section, just a short wrap up of the key takeaways that you want to take from the course up to that point, the 50 stack review and the PKO hand history. So the main takeaways from those two hand histories. It's short, it's like 18 minutes. Then I walk you guys through, I made two final tables on one night. It was just like a $50 turbo and a $30 turbo tournament. So I just hit record and walk you through my thought process on how I approach low and mid stakes final table situations and different player types. And I think it's pretty useful to understand how to approach turbos specifically. I think that's a common structure that you will run into. I know playing live tournaments, the blind levels are usually anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. That's 20 minutes is a hyper turbo and 40 minutes is still a turbo, even though live people think that that's a long time. It's not. You don't see that many hands per level. It's just not fast enough. The cards are not dealt out fast enough. So having some material on turbo tournaments is really important for this course. I think we'll find it very useful. And then, yeah, the last section here, which is another amazing part of this course, is the live coaching sessions. Brian, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so Mike and I have both been working with our friend Jake, who's actually been studying very hard, and he's been crushing lately. So we both go through some sessions with him. One of the ones I've done with him is a database analysis, which is probably a little bit like deep for what some of you guys are looking for. But if you do want to get a little bit more into the weeds and see like what targets you want to be aiming for some of your stats, like how often you want to be calling flops, how often you want to be check raising, how often you want to be playing hands for each position, all of that sort of deep theory stuff. We do a breakdown of that for one of the hours. And there's another hour with me and Jake where we review some of his marked hands. So we just go through some of the hands that like were kind of crazy spots where he wasn't sure what to do, and we go through them together. So I think that the database analysis in particular, for anyone who's looking to get a little bit more advanced than the rest of the course, that's a fantastic way to sort of get started with that.
Yeah, and then there's 3 sessions of me and Jake, ranging from 60 to 90 minutes each. And I just go through with him how to play early stages, how to play mid stages, how to play late stages of tournaments. So again, like we're reinforcing how the field approaches these stakes of tournaments and what the type of strategies that you're going to run into and how to counter those strategies. So we cover the whole gamut, and we focus on fundamentals the whole way through. That's it.
Yeah, and as you and I were talking before we got on this webinar, Mike, this is not a flashy course. We talked about, Phil Ivey has his master class, Danny Negreanu has his master class. Those were made by professional teams of videographers, and there's a 15-minute montage of Phil living it up in Las Vegas. And I got nothing bad to say about those courses, but obviously you're paying for that stuff. Whereas in this course here, you guys just jump right into it, and it's 20 hours, and the amount of content and practical information in there is just incredible. So now, and I get the feeling that was by design. You weren't going for flashy here. You were going to deliver max value to your viewers. Would that be a true statement?
Yeah, we don't hold back. Like, we just go through a hand history and review it and talk about the strategy in every single spot.
We wanted to aim this more at mid stakes players. There's so much material out there for like high stakes players, right? Like you were saying before, you can watch these two like Germans with 200 IQs go through all this solver stuff, or else you can find something that's a little bit more approachable for the average recreational poker player. And so our goal was to aim, very blue collar, like you were saying, something that's just functional and that's going to help somebody who's like decent but not amazing at poker take that next step up.
Yeah. So if you're currently playing low stakes, you'd like to move up to the mid stakes, or even if you intend to continue playing at low stakes, but you just want to start totally dominating your opponents at the low stakes games, I think that would be a good reason to get this course as well. So yeah, I think it's a great course. I mean, I'm kind of joking when I say this, but kind of not. when Doyle Brunson came out with Super System, you know, he was scorned by other poker players. Like, what are you doing giving away all of our secrets? Yeah. Are you worried you gave too many of your secrets away in this course? Because you really didn't hold anything back.
I think at this point of poker's evolution, there's just so much material out there that it's more about how much work you're willing to put in and how you best process information. There's not really secrets. There's like supercomputers that can solve any spot now. So it's just all about how much you study, how you categorize all the information, how you hold it all together. You know, it's not like it's all in plain sight, but it's a matter of, you know, systematizing it. So yeah, when Doyle wrote his book, that wasn't the case. That was like the first time a pro wrote all this stuff down on paper. So it was very revolutionary. In this case, we're aiming at more of a particular market, and we're taking information that's commonly known within the professional poker world, but we're just delivering it in a more digestible fashion.
Yeah, good way of putting it.
Yeah, and to add a little bit to that is the honest truth is most of you won't make all the adjustments you need to make, you know? So it's just like, will this come back on us and cost us money in the future? Like, that's a question that gets asked. And, you know, this is something I picked up from Alex. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Alex Fitzgerald. I know Steve's worked with him and I've worked with him and made courses with him. And he's, you know, he likes to say, as very bluntly, most of you won't do the work. Only a small percentage of people will actually get in there and do the work. And those are the people that, you know, we want to hear from too, that, you know, the course helped them and made a difference and they've applied certain concepts, and we want to hear from everybody. But yeah, it's easy to sit and watch something. It's a lot harder to take notes and actively try and get better and study actively and apply new information. So it's all there for you. We lay it out for you. There's other places where you can get good information too. But we did our best to show you how two people that have been doing this for a long time for a living think about the spots and approach these spots.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, I'm pretty responsive on Twitter as far as answering poker strategy questions about the course. I've had a few people DM me or tag me in tweets or whatever, and I always like go out of my way to try and answer any questions to provide that little bit of extra value. So if you're reading through it and you have you know, questions about it, feel free to find me and ask me.
What's your Twitter handle?
B Paris Poker.
Well, that's great. We really appreciate you guys giving us a shot at this for half price, because it's totally worth $597 with 20 hours of content there. You know, and you've got, as you mentioned, these recorded private coaching sessions. So it's just like getting private coaching from you guys. And you think how much that would cost you to get 20 hours of private coaching from you guys. And it's really an amazing course. And it's great that you're giving us a shot here at it for half price. And that'll only be till Friday. So, and everyone hopefully sees the link there in the chat window. So don't wait. Obviously, even if you did miss out on this sale, buy it at $597 because it's still a great deal at that price. But I hope you'll get in on this deal before Friday. And I think we've got a little more. Can go maybe another 15 minutes if you guys want to. If there's some other questions in the chat window there you want to go ahead and take.
Yeah, I was focused on the presentation, so I haven't been on top of the questions. Hopefully,
yeah, I've been answering as many chat questions as I can, but we'll see if we got any good ones.
Okay. And while you're looking to see if there's any other questions, I'll recap again. So your top 3 points you made tonight in your presentation. Number one was about, again, not playing loose or tight at the correct times. People playing too loose early on in the tournament, but too tight later in the tournament when they actually ought to be doing the opposite of that. That was point number one. Point number two was underestimating the value of being the original raiser. And number three was the idea of falling in love with these small pairs and just, you know, too much set mining in these tournaments, and the amount of chips you can just burn off, just, you know, falling in love with small pairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone has questions about elaborating on any of that or just general poker pro questions or whatever, I'm happy to answer those. We've, you know, I like to think we live pretty interesting lifestyles, so we might have some
take
Answers on-
advantage. It's pretty hard to nail Brian down and get him to sit down and
While we're waiting for someone to ask a question, I think a good question that a lot of people are probably wondering is, how do you stay focused especially during these multi-day events where you're playing, a large number of hours for several days in a row? Would you have any secrets for how you maintain your focus?
Have to exercise a little bit on your 5-minute breaks, and nothing, and then make sure that you're well rested. And especially if you have a big day 2 or whatever, you have to really prepare for it. Like Mike was saying, you treat it like a sporting event,
Yeah, and to keep my head in the game, like when I make a day 2 of a tournament, on some sites you know where you're going to be seated, like they don't reseat you for day 2 or even day 3 sometimes. You can pull up the other tables and you can look up all the players. You can go through the replayer if you have the tournament up, if you have their tables up, like on PokerStars, you can go through the hands and you can take notes on players on hands that you missed. So, I mean, that's just a little trick that I picked up over the years in preparing for like day 2s. But as far as staying focused, you can't eat a lot of carbs. I tend to not eat too much food. I do drink some coffee. So,
it's good for live too, what you were saying about looking people up, like on day 2 for a live tournament, you look up everyone's hand in mob and you see how experienced they are and everything. That's a big one.
Yeah.
You mentioned back when you first started, Mike, not really thinking too much about bankroll management and spending 20% of your entire bankroll on one event or something. How about nowadays? Are there any particular bankroll management techniques you use to handle the big swings in tournament poker?
Well, I dislike the swings so much that I have an investor that covers most of my buy-ins. I own a small part of my bankroll or whatever. I don't know what you would call it, my stake. And then my backer has a big percentage of it and we split that 50-50. So that's how I deal with it. So the swings don't stress me out because I don't go from having 100K in my bank account to having 7K. It's like, wait a second. Like, and I do go on 100K down swings. It's, pretty normal. I don't even want to deal with that. So I just don't. So I choose not to deal with it. And so I just have, a small percentage of my own action. And, like over time, as I accumulate wins and more money that I feel comfortable with, then I just buy more of my own stake. So I'm a bit of an anomaly. Like a lot of people can't last this long with 50% of their wins because they can't manage their money. I can manage my money very well. I have other investments. And I do other things that can help sustain the lifestyle. And I keep my living expenses low. So, and I don't spend extravagantly on anything really, so those are, as boring as that is, those are key things that have allowed me to, last this long.
I take the opposite approach. My investments are so high variance that my poker buy-ins are just like whatever.
He's not lying.
So yeah, I don't know. I like variance. Like I was saying at the beginning, I embrace variance as long as I have the best of it, right? So if I think I have the best of it, I'm very willing to have swings in both directions. A long time ago, I just sort of convinced myself that money is just like numbers on a screen. And that's just kind of how I approach it. But that's not for everyone, obviously. And it took me a lot of years to get to that point. I do want to go into a little bit of something, which is I think that you should never play a tournament where you're not fully comfortable with losing or bubbling or whatever. If you're playing a tournament scared, you're going to miss a ton of opportunities. And like for tournaments, especially, you have to be willing to have like a chip leads, a top 5 stack or something, and like punt it off against one of the other stacks on a bluff sometimes, if that's what the situation calls for, if you want to truly optimize your game, right? So I think it's a very important personal rule that you should never enter a tournament where you're not totally willing to just like, bust it on some big play or whatever. Like I think you should never be scared money in a tournament. It's very, very hard to play correctly if you're scared money, because, even aces lose 20% of the time, and you're not going to be getting aces that often. You're going to be getting a lot thinner spots than that. So yeah, whatever bankroll management strategy you use, just make sure that you're always fully comfortable with busting any tournament that you're in, or any, cash game stack that you have or whatever, or else it's going to be really hard to play well.
Yeah, and when applying new information, like after studying, do it in lower stakes. Like lower your stakes for a week and just
Yeah, that's another thing.
apply new concepts so that it's like, I was told this at the beginning of my, going into MTTs full time by my mentor was like, buy into a low stakes game and 3-bet the same guy 10 times in a row and see what he does. Just literally pick a guy and just 3-bet him 10. Just be aggressive. Just try things out. Like his point was to open my game up and to open my mind up to how people adjust to different strategies and to just try things out. And so just make sure if you are trying things out to do it in a comfortable setting financially.
I have a question here about using GTO in live tournaments, which I think is a great thing to address. So GTO is, just basically a shorthand for trying to play in a theoretically optimal way, which means that when you're playing theoretically optimal, the goal is to avoid being unbalanced, and therefore you can't be exploited. So playing theoretically optimal is this really high-minded sort of thing that is going to come into play in like super high stakes tournaments, or like with a computer playing against a computer. When you're playing against other humans, it helps you to know what theoretically optimal looks like, but you're not often going to want to play strictly theoretically optimal. You're going to want to make adjustments. And the more recreational or inexperienced your opponents are, the more of those adjustments you can make. So I think that it's helpful to study theory. It's helpful to know what the theoretically correct answer is in any given spot, but you shouldn't religiously adhere to it unless you're playing against very tough competition.
I will say to go even deeper, I have a friend he's one of the best tournament players in the world. Brian, I'm sure you're very familiar with him. Yuri Martins, the nerd guy. He goes by the nerd guy. Anyway, he said that like he spent the last 5 years studying theory. Like he's at the top of the food chain right now in tournaments, and he spent the last year. This is what he said to me. Now I just play tournaments and see the flaws that my opponents have in their theoretical approach to the game, and I exploit it. So it's actually like a full circle thing. It's like at the end of the day, you are supposed to adjust to your opponents and try to be one step ahead. So like any one strategy is not necessarily going to work. So familiarize yourself with the different options that you have so that you have, a tool bag full of different tools, and then you can just pull them out at any time and use them in the correct situation. So yeah, I just think it's funny that he's probably studied more than anybody I know that I've ever seen. He has an insane work ethic, and he knows the theory of the game probably better than anyone or close to it. And he just, once he got there, he just like reversed back and he just went to an exploitative approach, which is the opposite of what GTO is, I guess, in theory.
Right.
So
yeah, once you know what people need to do in order to fight back against certain strategies, and once you know what they're not willing to do, then you can really go hard on, exploiting that.
we actually talk about that in a spot, Brian, where like you see the guy show up with queen 9 off. He like 3-bets you from the big blind with queen 9 or small blind. And you actually just go into, what that means and what information you can extrapolate just from that spot where he 3-bets you with that hand, and like what other mistakes he's going to be making because of that. I mean, that's what your job is as a tournament professional.
Yeah, it's the art of making probabilistic inferences from limited information, and so someone stepping out of line even once can really give you a ton of information.
How important is it to you guys to, you mentioned, Mike, how you have some backers as far as helping you out with your bankroll management, but how important is it to you to network with other tournament professionals just to share ideas and figure out, I think there's some people who think that they can become a poker professional by themselves without any kind of support network. Would you agree that that's possible, or do you really need to network with other pros?
Sure,
possible, but it's
it's
hard.
possible. Yeah, it's probably not the best approach. Uh, I still study. I still get coaching. Um, I'm not constantly getting coaching, but it's something I've done consistently over my career. Is I will go to a coach every now and then and recalibrate. Also, the games, and you got to go to someone that's better than you. You can benefit from talking to anybody about strategy because you can just learn how other people think, if nothing else. But go to someone who's better than you and pay them for their time and expertise, whether it's $100 an hour or $300 an hour or even $500 an hour if you're playing high enough. Um, it'll just save you a lot of time, headache, and money. It's just an investment in yourself. So that's a way that that's how I've approached that overall, is continue to ask questions, seek, uh, trying to stay on top of trends in the game and knowing what information is out there, which is getting harder and harder to do, obviously, because there's just more information day by day. But being open-minded, and yeah, I do network a little bit. I have like the same core group of friends, but some of them have moved on from poker, and like not for any reason, not like because they couldn't play, they just are not that as interested as they used to be. Maybe they're interested in crypto, or maybe they're interested in something else. So yeah, I think it's important to network a little bit, but
Well, even
I
even
think,
if you don't have access to the networks of pros like we do, it can help to just have a friend who also plays tournaments, and you're both kind of learning about concepts, or maybe watching courses, bouncing ideas off each other, talking about hands. Not everyone necessarily can plug into the network of online professionals immediately, but just having a group of people who you talk theory with, and sort of you can swap action or go to tournaments together or whatever. I think that can be very beneficial for everybody. We have a question about the studying techniques section of the course. If you want to go into that a little bit, Mike, about what we mean by that, like how to study, I guess.
yeah, we talked about that in like the podcast at the beginning, which is like the first section that you'll listen to. But yeah, I mean, whatever is out there, like you can use. I did this review with ICMizer. I am a huge advocate of using this program. They're constantly updating it, making it better. I have a course about PKOs with the guy that made this program. And I know how much work goes into this, and they do all the math for you. This is a great tool for tournaments. Hold'em Resources Manager is another one that you can use. I use ICMizer, familiarize myself with it, and get good at using it. Whichever tool you decide to use, you can use DTO, which Brian uses, and I think you're
I'm a
sponsored
sponsored
by them.
professional, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good tool.
Yeah, you can use DTO, you can use ICMizer, you can use PioSolver, which does post-flop work. But I think an even more powerful tool for you is to get something like Hold'em Resources Manager or ICMizer, so that you can study like 1 to 30 big blinds and understand the math behind shoving and folding. And that's the power of this program. This also does, it's called ICMizer because it goes deep into the independent chip modeling, and like the math, the decisions you make on the bubble or the decisions you make at the final table. It's really good at crunching those numbers for you. Like I'm sure you guys didn't notice, but like if you see I'm still sharing my screen, right?
Yeah.
Like this little thing here, FGS2, like if you unclick that, it just changes the results. If you click it, it changes the results in another way. And what it is it's future game simulations. So it basically runs out all the possible scenarios in the next 2 hands. So it's really powerful for like short stack final table play. If you're like at a turbo final table or a super turbo final table in quick structures, this is a really powerful tool that will tell you how often somebody is going to bust in the next 2 hands or double up or whatever. It runs through all the possible scenarios, and it does it all the way up to 6 hands sometimes ahead. So that's a really cool tool that you can use for final table situations. But this is a program that I like live and die by. Like, love this. You can use Pio but I think that it's most useful for cash game players. But you can also get a lot of benefit from it for tournaments. It's just that the shifting dynamics in tournaments makes it a very hard tool to get good answers from. What do you think about that, Brian?
Well, it's also very time intensive, especially someone who's playing
Yeah.
live tournaments. You have to put in all the parameters of the hand and then run it. So it kind of depends on, what level you want to study at. But yeah, I think during the podcast portion of the course, we go through all the different options and the different merits and ups and downs and all that.
Yeah.
So these are good tools to use for, doing a lot of studying off the felt. But as you mentioned, it still helps also to have a network of people that you discuss hands with. And I like the fact that
Absolutely.
you admitted that you have a coach, Mike, because you think that after 10 or 15 years of playing pro, you would need a coach, and that takes a certain amount of humility to still have a coach. And when you look at other fields as well, it's the same kind of thing. Even the people at the top pro golfers and pro tennis players and stuff, they all have coaches as well, because they realize that there's no matter how good you are, there's always ways you can improve, and it's always helpful to have a third, another person to, who can kind of step back and take a look at your game as a whole and really make little tweaks here and there. So I think that's great that you still have a coach, even though you're a professional yourself.
I think it's
absolutely
imperative. I know Brian's gone. I watched Brian get like months after, or like the year after he got a ton of coaching. Surprise, surprise. I was at huge final tables and having tons of scores. And Brian's gotten plenty of coaching as well. Like it's just something you have to do. That's
I think Hold'em is one of those things where the more you learn about it, the more you realize just how little you know. And like I'm always just, I'm astonished about how many times I'll review a hand history. I'm just like, I don't know the answer here. Let's look it up, and you'd think you'd know, but it's a tiny little, that 4 on the board becomes a 3 and suddenly the whole strategy changes. So it's a very, very deep game. And I think that's one of the reasons it's, survived for so long. It's played at the highest level. It's actually a very interesting game. It's a very aggressive, creative game at the highest level. So it's really fun to study and learn more about.
Yeah. Even after you've seen millions of hands, you think you would have seen every possible situation that could ever come up, and then something surprises you like that.
Right, especially in tournaments, because there's always that extra wrinkle, like, oh, this hand's happening on the final table bubble, or this hand's happening when this guy is like really short and this guy has a bunch. Everything is just very slightly different. That keeps it really fresh, I think.
Yeah. Well, hey, this was fantastic, guys. I think we should wrap it up here. Thank you both so much for doing this, and thank you for the again for giving us the half price deal on your course. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. That's about all I have. Yeah, anything you guys want to end with, or we'll
if you guys watch, I have a Twitch and YouTube channel. If you guys are interested in that, I have a lot of old videos of me playing online tournaments on YouTube. If you guys want to check that out, it's Pete Paris Poker on Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter. Those are my 3 platforms that I'm active on. So if you guys want to follow me and check out a bunch of free content there, feel free to do so. Yeah,
and you have a really popular Twitch channel. You've got something like 40,000 subscribers, I believe.
Followers, yeah, it's
followers they call them.
But yeah, it's been pretty big. I've been doing it less lately because I have 2 kids now, so I don't have quite as much energy to be streaming all the time. But I still try to stream at least like once a week, and any big final tables that I make. So there's still a decent amount of content coming out of there.
Great. All right, everyone. Well, I'm putting one more time. I'll put there's the link to buy the course, and that deal will only be good till Friday, so don't wait. Thank you guys again, and I guess that's all for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for watching and letting us talk to you about poker for a while.
All right.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter too at strungout12, and you can tweet and ask questions just like Brian said, or you can message me if you have any questions too on there. That's it.
All right, great. Thanks, Mike. All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks for staying up late with us.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys.
See ya. Bye-bye.